David Brewster here with a new episode of 3 for All. This is 3 Yngwie Malmsteen Licks from 1984, and this is technically the second time I've featured Yngwie Malmsteen in a 3 for All episode, looking at some of his licks. And the other episode from a few years ago, that was also from 1984. So the same player, Yngwie Malmsteen, the same year, 1984, and technically he was working with the same band, which is Alcatrazz. But this is from a different concert, and it features different licks. And if you search around, you can also find episodes of Chordplay related to Yngwie. There's the chords of Yngwie Malmsteen, the classical side of Yngwie Malmsteen, looking at some of his nylon string parts. There's also a Breaking Chords episode, Yngwie Malmsteen style arpeggios, or something like that. But without question, Yngwie is a very important and dynamic guitar pioneer, blazed a trail and pioneered neoclassical rock and metal for everybody. And I know when I first heard Yngwie when I was a kid, I was familiar with Van Halen, Steve Vai, and I started getting into Satriani. And then I heard Yngwie, and it just scorched my ears. I couldn't believe how fast and clean and precise he was. It just blew my mind. And speaking of blowing minds, what about that one-year window from 1983 to 1984 within Yngwie's career? I mean, it's crazy. When he joined Steeler, and they released an album in early 1983, then he left Steeler, joined Alcatrazz, and they released No Parole for Rock and Roll. That was also in 1983. And then early 1984, Alcatrazz released a live album. He left Alcatrazz and then released Rising Force, his debut. And, from 83 to 84, there's no question, Yngwie was on fire. Here's another mind blower. When I was putting the material together for this episode, I kept finding all these photos of Yngwie, and it was him at home or in his studio, and I just couldn't help but notice like the walls of guitars around him, and they were stacked up and leaned up against each other, or fanned out and laid out in front of him and stuff. And when I found those photos, I thought, you know what? What does Yngwie have in his guitar collection? I know there's a ton of scalloped fretboard Strats that are vintage, but I've seen, flying V's and Les Pauls and all sorts of things in his collection. So I would love to just scope it out and see what he actually has hiding in his guitar stash. And if you'd like to dive a little deeper into Malmsteen's universe, I did have a lesson with Guitar Player magazine, and that would have been back in the August 2016 issue with Moves Like Malmsteen, and that's a technique-focused Yngwie Malmsteen tribute. And that'll definitely shape up your picking technique and position shifting ability, and it's directly related to Yngwie. The licks in this lesson came from a live performance in 1984 from the band Alcatrazz, and this was in Japan. And the solo that Yngwie plays is actually during the song Lost in Hollywood, which is an old Rainbow song, but they covered it during this concert, and Yngwie's just ripping. And I really like the ideas. It's a little different than some of the other licks that you might see from Yngwie. And there is some sweeping and some tapping and all kinds of stuff. So here we go. All right, the first lick's a tap bending idea, and I'm a sucker for tap bending licks and phrases. And it's something like this. One more time. So most of the solo revolves around F sharp minor. And right there, Yngwie's basically bending B up to C sharp, a whole step. And then he's going to hold that bend, and he's tapping E right there. But with that held bend, that E's going to sound like F sharp, like this. Right? And then he's going to hold that bend, hold that tap, and then release the bend. And that's really unusual. Right? So that's really weird. You don't really see that too often. Pull off that B to A, dip your bar on that G sharp, hammer onto A, and then end on F sharp back there, like this. One more time. It's got that really subtle kind of dip to the bar. And he's really aggressively hitting that F sharp there at the end. And he might actually be wiggling the bar too, I'm not sure. It's really frantic. But one more time here. I do like those tap phrases, like I said, we've been looking at tap phrases from Eddie Van Halen, or Steve Vai or somebody, and it's definitely, Yngwie's kind of take on the tap bend. Okay, up next is a pedal point tapping idea, and this is very unusual. It's also very difficult, but something like this. more time. Really strange. And we have featured pedal point in other episodes on this channel, and I've actually featured a tapping pedal point lick before, but it was the exact opposite of this, because the tapping lick was more like this. Right, with a stationary tap note, and then your fret hand started dancing around the fretboard. This is the flip of that. Now we're holding a single bend, and then you're frantically tapping like a madman. But for this lick, we're basically bending this B to C sharp once again, but it's an octave lower than where we had it for the first lick. Because that's, you know, just a reminder, that's where the first lick was bending that B to C sharp, and then we were tapping that E like that. Well, now we're doing this. So you're going to bend this B to C sharp, and then you're going to hold that bend, and you're frantically tapping this melodic pattern, you know, with your right hand or your picking hand like this. You know, something like that. One more time, real slow. And at the end, you're going to release that tap, and then you're kind of sliding into that F sharp. So that's really weird. So I guess the first thing I would recommend is get the sound of that melodic pattern in your head, and then you can slowly start to tap it out like that. And also muting is really difficult with this, because keep in mind we're holding a bend, so that G is kind of pushed up next to the D string, so you're really going to have to be crafty as far as how you're muting and tapping this idea. Okay, up next is one of Yngwie's crazy sweep picking ideas, and it's something like this. One more time. So right there, it's really interesting when you notice, you know, Yngwie is so smooth, and everything he does when he's alternate picking or sweeping, or just blazing and shredding, it's like his hands are barely moving, but you hear this flurry of notes flying out. And I've really tried to mimic, or at least imitate, that effortless kind of smooth, you know, sweeping technique that he has. I'm not going to claim I've nailed it. I'm still working on it, definitely. That's hard. But I'm trying to kind of channel or emulate him when I start sweeping. And that's kind of what's happening right there. So really slow. It starts in G major right there. We're kind of moving from G to A, and then all the way up to C. But right there with this G pattern, and we're basically just doing downstroke sweeps. You're not really ever doing upstroke sweeps. There are a couple upstrokes, just single, you know, upstroke picked notes. So you're basically sneaking in one upstroke right before you do that series of downstroke sweeps, like this. So it's downstroke, pull off, upstroke, and then downstroke, sweep, sweep, sweep. Like that. And you've got that kind of bigger stretch, and you reach up and grab that E note right there. And take that same idea, move it up a whole step, and do it in A. Right. And then the same thing up here in C. And it's really hard to mimic, you know, Yngwie, because he's so smooth and it's so effortless. And if you watch his hands, it's just, he's just coasting right over the strings. You rarely ever see him strain or, you know, have to dig in. It's just kind of real loosey-goosey and flowing. But then when you hear him play, it's like, man, it's just so smooth and clean and awesome. So I'm definitely still working on those sweeps, but that's the I guess the key, or your goal, is try to get that real smooth action happening and not that real jerky, stiff stuff that you see people do. Real smooth and relaxed. All right, here's a bonus lick from this live footage, and it's not really a lick, it's actually a classically influenced cadence, and I love when Yngwie performs something authentically classically influenced like this. One more time. So we're basically in F sharp minor still, and he's basically weaving between F sharp minor and C sharp major implied all the way through. But he starts with a single A right there, this double stop, and then right there bar the 14th fret on the top 3 strings, that's F sharp minor, and then right there, there's C sharp major, back to F sharp minor. So if you actually perform this the way that I just did, it's a great workout and kind of a finger independence little exercise. Then you're going to move back there, there's C sharp major to F sharp minor, and then this little, and then right there it's actually part of E major right there, E over G sharp, and then a little part of A5, a little bit of vibrato right there, and that's actually part of C sharp major right there, it's the 3rd and the 5th, and then just end on F sharp power chord or F sharp 5, like this. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of 3 for All with 3 Yngwie Malmsteen licks from 1984, and definitely Yngwie's been a huge influence and inspiration for me since I was a kid. And I've always loved classical music and John Williams and stuff like that, Mozart and Beethoven and Bach, and I love the electric guitar and rock, obviously. So you mix classical with rock music, and you have neoclassical rock or neoclassical metal, which is definitely Yngwie's forte and what he helped pioneer, back in the early to mid 80s. But then you obviously have Ritchie Blackmore and Willie John Roth, and there's a lot of important neoclassical rock and metal guitarists. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.